Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight on this lovely evening, Scottish summer evening. We're all very dry and happy. Good. Yeah, give a quick show of hands of who's been to Startup Grind before. Great. And who's not been to Startup Grind before. Good. Welcome. Welcome. Just to give you a little bit of context, Startup Grind is a global network of 250 city chapters over 100 countries. And you are in Edinburgh today, there's one in Glasgow. And Lisa, please remind me when the next one is in Edinburgh.
So we're taking a break in July. We're taking a break in July, and then we'll be back in August.
Taking a break in July, back in August. I was meant to remember that. And there's a chapter in Glasgow run by a lovely man called Dan. So please check out Startup Grind Glasgow. And it's a great way to access the knowledge of people that you wouldn't normally get access to and meet all these lovely people in the community in Edinburgh. And hopefully you come along and you see some of the same faces every month. Steve and I help out with Lisa running the chapter. So without further ado, over to Lisa to lead this. And thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Michael. So we have Michael and Steve who are here from Shoal, which, if you don't know about Shoal, is a community for collaboration for people that work from home to actually build communities. And we really appreciate their help, so thank you. And so Startup Grind, as Michael had said, we're a global community, and we are very much about entrepreneurial role model learning. And so every month we get together and we hear from a founder who's built and grown a business. We hear about their journey, about lessons learned on the way to building growth businesses. Just a couple of housekeeping points. This is a conversation. So during the fireside chat interview, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, you don't need to wait to the end. So please put up your hand, and we'll bring you in. It would be great to hear any questions that you have. And we're live streaming tonight, so thank you to Product Forge for that. And we're very active on social media, and we like to build our community. So please, we'd love it if you could join us in the conversation and tweet away at Startup Grind SEO. But without further ado, I'm absolutely delighted and grateful to welcome Dr. Mostafa Afgani. Mostafa is the co-founder of pureLifi, who are the leaders in Li-Fi technology. Mostafa has a PhD from the University of Edinburgh and sent the very first Li-Fi signal back in 2011 when working with Professor Harold Haas in his research group. Mostafa co-developed the IP that the technology is based on and has 3 patents that the company is still using. So thank you, Mostafa, for joining us tonight. Delighted to have you.
Thank you, Lisa.
So just to get started, can you just tell us a bit about how did you start out in this industry and how did you meet your co-founder?
Okay, I guess the story goes back all the way to Bremen in Germany, and probably about 16 years ago now. I went to Bremen to do my undergraduate and master's degrees in September of 2001. Shortly thereafter, Professor Haas joined the university in his first teaching position. And I think from the very early days, I was kind of attracted to his way of teaching, which was very much hands-on, getting people to try out experiments, modeling, simulation, etc., etc. So in some ways, I ended up just doing almost all of my projects under his supervision, which lasted through my master's. Then I think it was in 2006, 2007 when he was offered a position here in Edinburgh to take up the title of professor. He kind of said, all right, if you want to come along, there is a PhD in it for you. So I thought at that point in my life, yeah, sure, why not? Sounds like a good opportunity. So, here I am in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
So 2007, I started working on my PhD, which, funny enough, had nothing to do with Li-Fi or any of the things that underlie it, but is still in the area of, I suppose, signal processing and communication. Then at the end of the PhD, Professor Haas applied for Scottish Enterprise Proof of Concept Fund to start exploring some of these concepts that underlie Li-Fi. Actually, before we moved to Edinburgh, we had done some preliminary work and published a paper which showed that it was possible to transmit high-speed signals through a LED light. I think that was part of my master's project. But anyway, PhD, nothing to do with it. End of PhD, AC proof of concept program, which midway through resulted in that first Li-Fi signal being sent through that TED Global demonstrator.
Yes, and there's a TED Talk, is that right? That
Yeah, so 2011 was when we had the TED Talk. There was a bit of a funny story behind that as well.
Okay.
I think it was early 2011 or late 2010, I can't quite remember what. We used to have our usual weekly team meetings with Professor Haas and all the other guys.
And this is your research group?
Yeah, exactly. So in one of those meetings, he kind of mentioned, well, you know, I got this invitation from this guys called Ted. I'm not really sure what to do about it. So it's like, no, you got to take that one.
Yeah.
So then it was a race, because at that point in time, what we had was just some kind of lab bench demonstrators, which you know, sent a signal through the light, captured it, and then processed it all offline on a computer, showing that, okay, you can send something through light, but nothing that would allow you to actually do real-time communication. So I think we had about maybe 3 months to put that together. So I scrambled, started putting together all the digital electronics, the code, the video player, etc., while my coworker, Dr. Vasu Popula, who's currently, I think, a lecturer at the university. He was the second RA on the project.
University in Edinburgh?
Yes.
Okay.
So he kind of worked on all of the analog hardware bits. So together, we pulled together the demo, and, well, I suppose the rest is history.
Okay, amazing. And when did you actually start to commercialize this and build it into a company?
So 2011 is when the TED Talk took place, and in some ways, I suppose that was our watershed moment, because even back in 2011, we weren't really the only people who were looking at this technology.
Okay.
It was being developed in a number of different places around the world, different universities, etc., etc. But you know, TED having the global reach that it has, it almost made us synonymous with the technology.
So it gave you that platform.
Exactly, gave us a platform, the impetus to push it forward.
Amazing.
So 2012, the proof of concept project ended. We'd clearly shown that we could do this.
Yeah.
We had some angel funding lined up to launch the company. I believe we also had SMART grant from SE again to help work on the first platform. So 2012 January is when we started operating as a company. So I think back then it was called Visible Light Communications Limited or something like that.
You got a snappier name now.
Yep, definitely. I think we're on our third one.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Okay, and do you want to talk us through that founding team and how was that structured?
Sure. I think the founding team was really the three of us. There was, of course, Professor Harold Haas, who had that very first idea that LEDs could be used for doing data communication. There was myself, who actually put together the engineering behind it to put together a platform. And then finally, there was our very first CEO, Gordon Povey, who during the proof of concept phase looked after all of the commercial aspects. That is about setting up the company and you know, putting together the grant applications, etc., etc. Yeah. So in some ways, a lot of the early work was done between Professor Haas and Gordon. So it was my role really started once the company was founded, and it was really just up to myself to push forward all the engineering, the product development, the technology development from that point on.
Okay, okay. And do you want to talk us through a bit more about the technology, about how that's developed as you've grown?
Yeah, sure. So again, if we take 10 years a step back in time, what we had was really just, as you find in any electronics lab, little breadboards with tiny little LED and a tiny little photo detector, which did a few kilobits per second. Okay, then 2011 we had the TED demonstrator, which okay, there was a a cabinet. It wasn't only aesthetic; it was actually packed full of electronics.
Okay.
Weighed about.
And that was.
Yep, that was the angle poised lamp at the top, sending a stream of Li-Fi information down into a receiver, which was then played on a screen. But yeah, behind that cabinet was a whole lot of electronics. Weighed about 30 kilos, so not exactly mobile.
And this is just so I can summarize it. This is transferring data through
Yes.
light.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We back in 2011 we transferred a high definition video over an LED light, and that is exactly what we showed on stage. 2012 we spun out the company. We started working on our very first product platform, which went on to be called the Li First. Originally it was called the Smart Lighting Development Kit, but Li First probably sounds better anyway. So first year I actually found it very challenging, because as far as engineering went, it was a one-man band.
Yeah.
But I think you all can appreciate that developing a brand new technology which is hardware based requires quite a lot of manpower, quite a lot of effort. So our initial strategy back in those days was to actually engage a third-party supplier, so subcontractor.
So you outsourced it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So bulk of most of the development was outsourced to a third party, and the idea was that I would just oversee the development.
And was that in the UK or was that?
It was in the UK. In fact, it was very local.
Okay.
But it became quite clear that just because we were talking about doing something very new, which didn't really conform to any existing standards or ways of doing things, I think the guys, they're really good. They didn't fully appreciate how everything needed to come together. So it was a bit of a struggle. Then actually, shortly after we started operating the company, we brought on, I think, our, let's see, third employee, Karen Dowds, who is still our office manager. So she was instrumental from day one, because she let, well, I suppose Gordon focus on the commercials and the running of the business, and myself focus on some of the engineering, and she did everything from the finances, the HR, and everything else that nobody's ever got time for.
And I should mention that we have another member of your team here tonight. We have Sarah.
We have two, actually.
Two,
Robin's
sorry.
joined
Robin.
us quite recently. So anyway, we started building up the team from that point on, and actually from the very first beginnings of pureLifi, it's been very much engineering driven, very much technology driven. We then had I think our hardware engineer who came on board, and with his help we finally had a bit of traction on the product development, and then from that point on we got a firmware engineer on, and it just kept going from there. But in any case, 2013 we released the Li First platform, which was point-to-point communication system. Consisted of two units, as any Li-Fi system still does. They were about yay big, so already a major reduction compared to the 30 kilo cabinet.
Did you bring these with you? Because you showed me them at your offices.
That one I haven't shown you.
Okay.
I don't believe we actually have any of those left, but I do have the second and third generations, which I'll pull out of the bag in a minute. So those were units about that big. One went in the ceiling, connected to the LED light to modulate it and transfer Li-Fi data. The other was, again, similar size device, sat on the desk, connected to your laptop over USB, and provided the channel from the light. So they were both bidirectional and full duplex, so you could have uplink and downlink at the same time, and they did about 10 megabits per second. But the key thing here is, okay, we'd achieved major shrinkage, but even on the desktop side, it still required a 5-volt power supply, which meant that, okay, you could have wireless, but you were still tethered. Anyway, after the Li First, we decided to focus a bit more on the networking aspects, because the way we define Li-Fi, and the term is currently a little bit confused in the wider world, Li-Fi, from our point of view, is a very high-speed wireless communication technology, which is fully networked. It has support for multiple users from each light, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially, what you already have with your 4G and the Wi-Fi, et cetera, but everything just happens over a light.
Okay.
The user doesn't need to change the way they do things.
And tell me, as a non-technical person,
Yes.
what are the benefits of this technology coming from light rather than traditional Wi-Fi?
There are quite a few. The one that everyone gets immediately is the security. Today there is a lot of concern about the security of wireless communication systems because, somebody that you can't even see could be just sitting outside on the other side of the wall and hacking your wireless network. The whole Virgin Media debacle that's been on the news recently.
Yeah.
But with Li-Fi, intuitively, you can already see that in an enclosed space, it's not going through your walls, it's not going through your doors. So it provides a method of having a very secure wireless access mechanism, offering, the very same user experience that people are already used to. And then on top of that, what we also bring is data density. And the way to think about that is, when you think Wi-Fi again, you've probably got one, maybe two access points for this level. And I don't know, I'm pretty bad at counting, but that's still a lot of people just in this space, probably all competing for that one wireless access point, right? Which means that quite often you get very laggy connections, you might not even get on, et cetera, et cetera.
Like when you're on the train and
Yeah.
it tells you how many other people are connected.
Yes, exactly that. But with Li-Fi, each light is an access point of its own right. And therefore, if you think about how many people you normally fit under a single light, it's probably 1, 2, maybe 3. So you've got a lot fewer people competing for the same bandwidth that's coming out of that access point. And within this given space, where you had 2 access points with a combined throughput of maybe 600 or 700 megabits, you've got, I don't know, maybe say 100 lights. Now, our current technology gives you about 43 megabits from every single light. So 43 megabits multiplied by 100 is a lot more data for this space. So the data density advantage is the other thing that we can really bring to the table.
So, we have a question.
I was wondering though, does it make a difference, and I sincerely apologize if this is true of juvenile, anyway, if the light is say dimmer or on a higher efficiency bulb, that sort of thing, does that make a difference in the connectivity of the stream?
So for the streaming, the question was, does it make a difference based on the dimness or the level of the light?
Sure. I would say it depends. Normally, as you start bringing down the brightness of the LED, so as you start dimming it, initially there will be no impact. But as you get very low brightness levels, then of course your signal strength starts to go down a little bit as well. So yes, in that case, your data rate would drop off a little bit.
Okay, thank you. And could you tell us a bit about where the company is at now, in terms of what stage are you at, what size of growth?
Yeah, sure. So just to finish talking about where we were
Please.
with the platforms very quickly. From
Thank
the
you.
bulbs, we went to this thing, which became mobile because, well, what we really did was we packed a battery in there, hence the larger size. But this is something that you could strap to the screen of your laptop and you could start moving around. So that made Li-Fi mobile and networked. Still the same data rate, but all of a sudden we could have multiple users and roam around. Then that was, I believe, 2014.
Okay.
Then we decided that, okay, that was great, but that's not going to be the way forward. We as an engineering team, with the support from the commercial team as well, decided to throw out the designs, start fresh.
Okay.
And we landed up with our 3rd generation Li-Fi product, which is inside this box. Now you can imagine that the thing inside the box is a little bit smaller than the box. So within a space of about 9 months,
Wow.
we went from the Li-Flame to what we call the Li-Fi X.
Amazing.
So factor of 4 improvement in speed. So it went from 10 megabits to 43. Factor of 14 reduction in size. So yeah, that. And in terms of power consumption, we dropped it by, well, over half again, which meant that all of a sudden we could finally have a USB connected Li-Fi dongle.
So this plugs into the back of your laptop.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's mobile. You can transport that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just like any other USB dongle that you're used to.
I have a question. So just for the streaming, the question is, do you feel that with the evolution of the size, can you reduce that down further to like a chip size?
Yeah, I mean, if you start off with a 30-kilo cabinet and then follow that path, I think the answer is obvious. Yes, that's exactly where we intend to go over the course of the next few years, and you know, basically make every single handset Li-Fi enabled.
Amazing. So just to go back to the question from before,
Yes.
can you tell us about where the company is now, the size
Yeah,
of your
absolutely.
team?
So as I mentioned, the company has been very much engineering driven. So engineering makes up a very large part of the team. Back in about the same time last year, we were about 16 to 18 people. And of those, I think about 12 were engineers. Then we got some significant amount of funding into the company, which allowed us to really accelerate our ambitions with respect to the technology development, our commercial growth, et cetera, which meant that we actually needed to get a lot more people on board to help push that agenda forward. So today, I believe we are at 46, and that number
Wow.
changes on a weekly basis.
And you're hiring.
And we're hiring. Yep, there is, for anyone interested, there is a very long list of open positions on the careers page.
Please check it out.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. And in terms of like the market, like what is the market for your business? What is the opportunity?
It's for something like this, it's actually a very, very wide playing field. I believe today we have, well, I get the numbers always the other way around, but I think in 14 different countries, no, sorry, 11 different, okay, 14 different countries across at least 11 different use cases, with I think about 40 different engagements. I'm not entirely sure. Okay, anyway. So it goes from things like you know, the enterprise wireless, the indoor communication, to things you know, people probably wouldn't even think about, such as underwater communication.
Like a submarine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's actually one of those things that's one of those, well, could be a killer application if the, you know, oil and gas industry didn't suffer the fate it did. But state of the art for underwater communication until very recently was, you know, a few bits per second. So all of a sudden with Li-Fi technology, we can offer them megabits per second. So in a sense, over the course of a couple of years, we've improved the capacity of communication underwater by over 1 million times.
Wow. And in terms of the competitive landscape,
Yeah.
are other companies doing this?
Of course, apart from ourselves, there are a number of companies in the US, France. There are also a few research organizations around the world who are all very actively investigating Li-Fi technology. So those kind of offerings come in all kinds of different shapes, sizes, and numbers. And that's where some of that confusion in the market about what is Li-Fi comes from. A lot of the offerings that you might see are really point-to-point, or they don't have that networked element. Whereas, as I mentioned earlier, we offer a high-speed networked, etc. Communication solution. And I'm very proud to say that so far for that kind of definition of Li-Fi, we are still the market leaders.
Wonderful. I have a question.
Compared to those other companies that you compete against, what is the
So the question is, what is the main advantage that pureLifi has over the competing?
Sure. I think I can identify at least two different advantages that we potentially have. Number one is the company was founded on the basis of some IP licensed out of the university that was originally developed while we were in the proof of concept phase. We still, of course, maintain a very close relationship with the Lifi R&D Center at the University of Edinburgh, where Professor Haas is mainly based. And then the second one, I think for me, would be that I've been extremely fortunate to have a kick-ass engineering team. And I think we've simply done a much better job of pulling together the solution than anybody else has to date. And of course, that has thrown up a lot of interesting and novel ways of solving various problems, which we've promptly patented.
So can we talk now about funding?
Sure.
And you've raised significant funding for the
Yes.
business. Do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah, so didn't really prepare for this
So
one.
what
but
can you say?
So it's, I'm not really sure I can provide an exact number.
You don't
and,
have to do that, but
yeah.
you know the process of funding.
Sure.
how-
Okay. It's quite lengthy. It takes, I think, it took about 6 months or so last time around.
And so you had
But-
angel seed funding initially,
Yep.
and then you raised subsequent rounds.
We raised subsequent rounds. There was, of course, the friend, family, and founder. There was quite a few grants from ASC and so on. But I suppose last year is when we actually had our proper Series A. And well, it was a multi-million round, which has allowed us to do all the things that we're doing today.
And as Sarah,
So I can offer, but you can't, we also got support from the University of Edinburgh, Old College Capital, and we were funded by Temasek, the Singaporean.
Yep.
That's all.
so just for the streaming, so you're funded by Old College Capital and the Temasek. Is it a VC fund? Singaporean-based investment fund. Thank you. And as because obviously you're not a software business, you're a hardware business. So
Yes.
how did you find that in terms of raising funding?
I think that's probably been one of the sticking points for us trying to raise funding, because what we find is most funds have gone software only. A lot of them don't have the appetite for the risks that come with a hardware business.
Because you've
And
got a
the-
longer lead
Yep,
in and
longer
costs.
lead in, and it's also very capital intensive. So all of those factors do make it quite difficult.
And have you found that a challenging process in terms of going through fundraising?
It is, yes. So of course, what that means is we need to identify those funds and bodies that will or that have a track record of investing in hardware, which is unfortunately a smaller subset of the overall body these days than it used to be.
And you didn't find that in Scotland?
So far, I guess the main funding that we've had came from
It's come from
Singapore,
overseas.
and Scotland has been a bit difficult. But I think exactly. So I was going to clarify that it depends on the stage of growth of the business very much. So in the early days, there's actually a lot of support, and that's something I've been very pleasantly surprised by from ASC in the form of various grants and support and et cetera, et cetera. And of course, there are the angels around who have lended us a helping hand. But once we hit that scale stage, it's been very difficult.
You've looked overseas for funding.
Yeah.
And we have a question? So just to reiterate that, the question is, when you fundraise, you're not selling the current vision of the company. It's not the current state, it's the vision and where you're going with the business. So what were you selling them?
Right. I think what we sell is really, I suppose, the problem that Li-Fi is intended to solve, and that is spectrum crunch. If we look at all of the communication that's happening today, and I don't have the exact numbers with me, but I think there is a compounded annual growth rate of about 60% for data communication, out of which I think about 70% is indoors. Yeah, okay. All of which, as you can see, is happening more and more over your wireless connected devices. I mean, hardly anybody has a LAN connection to their machine, because it's mostly tablets, laptops, which use the Wi-Fi, et cetera, et cetera. So already the wireless spectrum is very saturated. Just thinking of Wi-Fi, if you open up the list, there's like 20, 30 different access points, each interfering with each other. And that problem is only going to get worse, because if you look at the radio spectrum, there is only a very finite amount of it available, and the number of times you can reuse it is limited. Whereas if you look to the light spectrum, visible and invisible, it's over 1,000 times greater than that. So Li-Fi offers that path to keeping up with the growing data demands of the modern society, and that's inevitable. Just the research in Li-Fi technology shows that it has the potential to surpass what is even possible with radio technologies today. So, well over gigabits, terabits of data rates potentially.
Amazing. And we've possibly touched on this question already, but just to build on that, you're a Scottish headquartered business. You're
Correct.
now international. How have you found the support and the ecosystem for growth businesses in Scotland?
Okay, I think generally it's been quite supportive. Again, just going back to ASC and the various kinds of funding and support we've received from them in the past. And then there is, of course, SDI, which helps with the international side of things.
Which is a big thing for you.
Oh, absolutely. I think the last few times we've been at Mobile World Congress, and that is one of the biggest shows for communication technology. It's always been under the Scotland banner.
And you have overseas sites now for the business?
We have overseas people, I think. Yeah. So I wasn't sure whether we actually have established sites, but we do have overseas business development personnel, and actually some of the engineering's currently also being done offshore.
Fantastic. So what have been some of the hardest, if you don't mind me asking, some of the hardest learnings for you? I mean, you've obviously gone from academia to building a business. What have you learned through that?
I don't, I suppose what's hardest? Hardest, I suppose, would be just maybe not necessarily the commercials, but the contractuals. Because coming out of the university, never been in a business, you don't have that mindset of trying to guess what the catch is, but you really need to figure that one out to, I suppose, keep an eye out for the business. Okay. But that aside, I think going into the business from an academic background, there's been a massive amounts of learnings with respect to how to interact with people, how to manage a growing team, how to recruit. So there's a lot.
And in terms of your team, do you want to talk a bit about this? Because you shared with me a bit about the team that you've built and the people that you've attracted in at a senior level. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think actually there's been quite a shift as of last year. As I mentioned, up until then we were quite a small team, but then we had to significantly accelerate all of our developments. So we got in our new chairman and our CEO, So our chairman currently is Mike Hickey, who used to be the CEO of Wolfson Microelectronics when it was sold to Cirrus. Alistair Banham, who's our current CEO, again coming from a very long career in the semiconductor industry. So Philips, NXP, spun off onsemi. I believe he used to be responsible for sales within Wolfson. So Mike and Alistair kind of know each other from there. But of course, these guys, actually sold things into Samsung, Apple, and all those people that we want to get into.
So they brought their black book as well.
Exactly. Yeah, they brought their network, and I think where that's really helped is really just propel the organization forward, and just a couple of key individuals that we currently have the pleasure of working with. And with myself taking somewhat of a different role within engineering, looking at the more forward-looking technologies. Gary Weiss is looking after all of the product and platforms development. Now, if the name Gary Weiss doesn't ring a bell to you, then maybe the Motorola StarTAC or the Razr does. So Gary's the guy who designed that really thin Motorola phone from early 2000 that had the laser cut keyboard. So that's the kind of talent that we have working with us today to help take this technology and products forward.
So you've built a really A-class team.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And we have a question at the back from Margaret. So the question is, is the business currently revenue generating? And if you can answer that, how much?
I can answer the first one, yes. I'm not sure I can answer the second one. In fact, the business has been revenue generating pretty much from 2013. Probably, well, of course, at a smaller scale in the early days, but since then it has been quite a large growth. So, yes.
Thank you. So I have 2 more questions, and then what I'll do is I'll open the floor in case there are any more questions from the audience as well. But what next for pureLifi?
Get inside every single handset. That's our world domination plan. So that's keeping engineering very busy. But engineering isn't everything in a company. You need the support of the commercial team. You need the organizational development. So we all have to work together as one unit. So it's a company that's currently going through a growth spurt, and just very much looking forward to it.
Amazing. And this is a question that we ask of all our guests. But for you, what would be the top 3 tips? So we have people here tonight who are thinking about or are already in the process of growing or building businesses. What are your top 3 tips for entrepreneurs?
Okay, probably the same ones that you've heard a million times before, but here goes anyway. I think the number one for me is always, or if I think back at it, it really is, take the plunge. It feels scary, but it's well worth it. When I went into the company, I had no idea which way it would go. Fortunately, it's been going the right way since. But I like to tell everybody that, even if it didn't quite go the way it has, or if it doesn't going forward, or whatever, the amount that you learn out of that experience and what you get out of it is it's incomparable to anything else. So very much go for it, take the plunge, start up your own business. There's a lot of local support available, as I've said, in the early stages to give you a helping hand. So very much go for it. Number 2, what's number 2? Number 2 is about, I suppose, picking the right people to work with, building a great team. I think it's, for me anyway, it's not all about the CV. You can read a CV, there is a lot on it, and that's nice, but for me it often comes down to the conversation that I'm having with the person. In my position and in the phase the business is currently, I don't know everything. My job is to bring on people who know more than me, because they will make the business successful. So for me to interview somebody like that, I can't necessarily quiz them too much on the technical details. So I would try to get the conversation going, get a feel for them, figure out how they would fit within the culture of the business. Is that a person that we see being part of the team? So that's an approach I've been taking, and maybe that's had some part to play in getting that kick-ass engineering team together, who's given us world-class products. So that's 2.
Number 3.
Number 3. What's number 3? I had this one. Yeah, well, this one you've probably heard a million times. Don't be afraid of failure, because startup company or new venture, you will have to go through multiple iterations before you refine your product, your strategy. That's just part and parcel of that life.
And we hear that a lot.
Yeah.
And that's really key. I mean, I've learned so much, so thank you. And what I'd like to do is open the floor if there are any more questions. Okay, so we have one here.
So what are some of the applications you can see with Li-Fi and IoT devices?
It's an interesting one. I suppose a lot of that is probably sensor driven, and probably goes hand in hand with the greater and greater automation that we see everywhere. Quite often, each and every one of these devices come with some kind of an indicator light. So you could envision that we can turn those lights into a little Li-Fi communication system, which automatically reports back periodic statuses and etc. to your network for better management and data collection and what have you. I mean, the applications are probably limitless.
Thank you. And I think we have another one at the back.
What's your position in the company now? I'm guessing that you must have had to have given up control over, I mean, I'm guessing at the start you're at the top of the pyramid, but what's your focus and role within the company as it stands today?
Actually, I am still very much the head of engineering. So my current role is as a CTO of pureLifi. So pretty much every line of engineering activity still reports into me. It just so happens that as well as doing the products and platforms, we are also now looking at what are the key enablers for Li-Fi as a technology going forward. And therefore, we've started to work in parallel on multiple of those technology development streams. And my colleague Robin here has recently come on board to take ownership of everything to do with software and firmware and lead that work stream for me. Well, together.
Fascinating. Do we have any more questions? Yep, Ben.
Hi. So you talked about having, I think it was 11 different case studies that you're working through. How do you select which ones you then chase after as a company and which ones you bet behind?
Sure, that's a very good question, and I suppose as a young company looking to make a buck wherever possible, that's a very difficult choice to make. But often, I mean, it just comes down to standard ways of scoping out an opportunity. I suppose objectively putting a number behind what it will be in the next 3 year, 5 year, et cetera, and then focusing our efforts on what's likely to yield the greater return. And I suppose for us, it also aligns a little bit with where we actually see Li-Fi going eventually. And it goes back to the statistics about 70 or 80% of data being generated indoors, where you've also got lots of lights. So it is very much that idea of Li-Fi being yet another wireless access mechanism everywhere, really.
Amazing. Do we have any more? You have a question?
Thank you. So scaling a company, you go from having to manage yourself and maybe 1 or 2 other people, and there's people, some of the highest paid people in the world, all they do is manage people, and you've come from a technical background, academic background. what have you had to do? What was the biggest sort of learning from that, from going managing yourself in technology to managing people, and what is the biggest tip to us all for that scaling up with people?
So for me, I think it comes down to a single word: trust in the people that you bring on. I'm bringing them on to help me on this journey and take the company forward. So I trust them to deliver on the roadmap that we've agreed on, that we've worked on together. So I'll just let them go off and do things on their own. And
So-
that's worked out well so far.
So hire smart people and let them get on with it. Would that be a summary?
Sorry, could you?
Hire smart people and let them get on
Absolutely.
with it.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yep.
Do we have any more questions? Another one, Lauren?
It's about not letting go of control. I think that's a big point here. You need to trust people. You need to believe that they will deliver the common objective.
Hi. Yeah, one of the biggest problems of any high growth firm is that they lose focus of what they're all about. Do you have any sort of mechanisms in place to ensure that your core focus is always sort of at the forefront of everything you do?
That's a very good point, and I suppose being in that scale phase, we are starting to see some of that, and we still do try to maintain very close working relationships with everyone. We do have monthly town hall meetings, as they're called, where we provide an update to what's going on to the whole team. So hopefully that helps share or reinforce the vision of the company and just get all the ideas across the table and make sure that we're all aligned.
Fantastic. So I think just based on a time perspective, we're going to close it there. I think you might be around for a little while
Sure.
afterwards. We have some more drinks and some time for networking. But I would just like to give a big thank you to Mostafa, and I have learned so much, and it's been fantastic. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me here.